The man who tamed lightning. Picture this. It's October 1920. America has just crawled out of the deadliest war it had ever seen. Thousands of families are still in mourning. Gold Star banners hang in windows across the country. And millions of people are quietly asking the same question, the question humans have asked since the first funeral fire. Is there anything on the other side? And then, onto this stage, walks an old man with a hearing aid in his ear and the faint smell of chemicals on his jacket. Everyone knows him. His name is Thomas Alva Edison, the Wizard of Menlo Park, the man who gave the world the light bulb, the phonograph, and the motion picture camera, the man who almost single-handedly electrified civilization. By 1920, he holds over 1,000 patents. 1,000, that's more ideas than most people have, in 10 lifetimes. This genius, gray-haired, 73 years old, sits down for an interview with American Magazine. The reporter probably expects stories about better motors, brighter bulbs, faster machines. Instead, Edison says this: "I have been at work for some time building an apparatus to see if it is possible for personalities which have left this earth to communicate with us." Silence. The reporter likely leaned in, asked him to repeat that. Edison continues, "If this is ever accomplished, it will not be achieved by any occult, mystifying, mysterious, or weird means such as are employed by so-called mediums, but by scientific methods. A phone to the dead, a machine for talking to ghosts. From the greatest engineer in America, the world lost its mind. Why nobody laughed? And everybody freaked out. To understand how something like this could happen, you have to feel the temperature of that era. 1918, the end of the First World War. Over 18 million people dead. Soldiers, civilians, entire generations left in the mud of France and Belgium. And then, as if the universe decided that wasn't enough, the Spanish flu swept the globe. Another 50 million. In 2 years, fathers buried sons, wives buried husbands, children grew up with photographs instead of parents. Whole communities hollowed out. People weren't just grieving. They were desperate for an answer. Is there anything after this? Was it all for nothing? Do the people we loved just stop? Spiritualism exploded. Mediums were booked weeks in advance. Ouija boards were selling faster than they could be printed. Even Arthur Conan Doyle, the man who invented the most coldly rational detective in all of fiction, became a devoted spiritualist and spent his final years touring the world giving lectures on communicating with the dead. But here's the crucial tension. Science was also doing the impossible. Radio, cinema, the telephone. 20 years earlier, you would have been called insane for claiming you could hear someone's voice through a little wooden box from 1,000 miles away. And yet, there it was. So society was thinking, why not? If a living person's voice can fly through the air without wires, why couldn't a dead person's? Some mediums of the era even called themselves phone clairvoyants and claimed they could channel spirits through ordinary telephone lines. Against that backdrop, Edison's announcement wasn't just sensational. It was almost logical. If anyone could build such a thing, it was him. The editorial office of American Magazine received over 600 letters after the interview ran. Readers offered to help with the design. Some claimed the device already existed. And, my personal favorite, one gentleman wrote in to ask how he could place a call from the afterlife, as he expected to die shortly and wanted to be prepared. That was 1920. But Edison wasn't a mystic. He despised Ouija boards. He mocked mediums openly. He called spiritualist seances unscientific nonsense. So what exactly did he believe? He had his own theory. And honestly, it doesn't sound as crazy as you might expect. Edison believed that every human being is composed of an almost incomprehensible number of microscopic particles. He called them life units. Hundreds of trillions of these entities make up a living person, sustaining their functions, carrying their memories, holding their personality. Here's the key idea. When the body dies, these units don't vanish. They relocate. They gather into swarms, like bees leaving a hive. And those swarms, Edison argued, carry the essence of who that person was. He even invoked Einstein. The theory of special relativity had recently proven that mass and energy are equivalent. So if these particles have mass, they can convert to energy and persist in the atmosphere long after the physical body is gone. Therefore, Edison wrote, if personality exists after what we call death, it is reasonable to conclude that those who leave this earth would like to communicate with those they have left behind. Almost convincing, right? He went further in his private notebooks, the ones his family later tried to suppress. He described the life units as almost autonomous beings with their own will, speculating they originally came from some other body elsewhere in the universe. In some entries, he referred to them quite tenderly as the little people, the man with 1,000 patents, writing about little people floating through the ether. That's Thomas Edison. Now, a lot of you are waiting for this part. Edison versus Tesla. Because how do you tell any Edison story without Tesla walking into the room? Their rivalry is one of the most spectacular in the history of science. It starts in 1882, when a young Serbian engineer named Nikola Tesla arrives in New York and starts working for Edison. Edison acknowledged his talent, but wasn't exactly warm about it, calling his ideas splendid, but utterly impractical. Then came the War of Currents. Tesla championed alternating current. Edison bet everything on direct current. Tesla won. Edison never quite forgave it. But here's where the internet has gotten a little creative. The popular version of this story goes like this. Tesla, experimenting with a crystal radio in 1901, heard mysterious voices coming through his equipment and started to wonder if they were from the other side. Edison heard about it, got competitive, and decided to build something better. The reality is more nuanced. Tesla did write about strange signals he picked up in Colorado in 1890 and again around 1901. He published about it in Collier's Weekly. He wrote, and I'm quoting directly here, "My first observations positively terrified me, as there was present in them something mysterious, not to say supernatural, and I was alone in my laboratory at night." But critically, the article was titled Talking with the Planets, not Talking with Spirits. Tesla was speculating about extraterrestrial signals, not ghosts. He had a moment of superstitious dread and then talked himself out of it like the scientist he was. There is no credible evidence that Tesla ever seriously believed he was in contact with the dead, or that he was trying to build a device to do so. What is true? Both men, in the same electrified era, were brushing up against the same bottomless question, each in his own way, each with his own instruments, both staring into the dark and wondering what was looking back. And that, honestly, is strange enough. Late 1920s. The exact date is unknown, and that vagueness is part of what makes this so unsettling. According to Modern Mechanics magazine, which ran an account in October 1933, Edison assembled a small group in his private laboratory. Scientists, engineers, and, here's the twist, mediums and spiritualists as well. Think about that room for a moment. Serious men in suits with notebooks and measuring instruments, sitting next to women in shawls with their eyes closed, murmuring invocations to call the dead. Edison switched on his device. It worked, something like a projector. A powerful lamp fired a thin beam of light, a pencil of photons, as one account described it, across the darkened room and onto a photoelectric cell connected to a sensitive meter. The logic, if the swarms of life units were drifting through space, even a single microscopic particle crossing the beam would deflect the needle. The mediums began their work, calling on spirits, asking the dead for a sign. The needle didn't move. Hours passed. The tension in the room must have been extraordinary. All these people staring at a small dial in the dark, waiting for a twitch that would rewrite everything humanity understood about existence. Nothing. Tense hours were spent watching the delicate instruments for the slightest indication, the magazine reported. And then it added, almost gently, which was why no one had heard of this experiment before. Failure. quiet, sealed, never officially acknowledged failure. But Edison, the man who made 10,000 failed attempts before finding the right filament for the light bulb, never called it that. He always said every failure is just the successful elimination of one more possibility. He went back to his notebooks. October 12th, 1926. Edison is 79 years old. 6 years have passed since the bombshell interview. He tells the New York Times that the whole thing, the spirit phone, the apparatus, the personalities which have left this earth, was a joke. A joke. After 600 letters, after secret experiments in a darkened lab, after detailed published theories about life units and swarms and post-mortem personality, after years of private notebooks filled with calculations, that's a very committed joke from a very serious man. But the story doesn't end with the retraction. In 1948, 17 years after Edison's death, his private diary was finally published, The Diary and Sundry Observations of Thomas Alva Edison. His surviving family was so mortified by what was in it that they demanded 2 chapters be removed from all unshipped copies before the book reached readers. Chapter 7, Edison's Economic Views. Chapter 8, Spiritualism. In America, those pages vanished. In France, they didn't. The 1949 French translation was preserved intact, the missing chapter included. In 2015, it was republished as a standalone book, Le Royaume de l'au-delà, The Kingdom of the Afterlife. Edison's own words, in his own voice, describing in methodical detail his theories about the survival of personality, his attempts to build the machine, his genuine belief that science could reach the dead. A joke? Or something the family knew was real enough to be embarrassing? Edison had a habit, a peculiar one even for him. He made pacts. It was a common practice in spiritualist circles of the era. 2 people agree. Whoever dies first tries to send a message from the other side. Romantic, in a morbid way. But for Edison, it wasn't romance. It was experimental methodology. He made such a pact with his engineer, William Walter Dinwiddie. Whoever went first would attempt to make contact. Dinwiddie died in 1920. Edison never publicly reported receiving anything. Even more striking, Edison apparently intended to continue his research after his own death. He genuinely planned to finish the spirit phone from the other side. He would be the experiment and the experimenter simultaneously. And then, here's where it gets genuinely strange. A decade after Edison died, a group of mediums conducting a seance in 1941 claimed to receive communication from Edison's spirit. He allegedly told them that 3 of his former assistants held the blueprints for the device he'd spent his last years designing. The group tracked down those assistants, assembled the machine according to the described plans. The machine didn't work. Edison's ghost, if that's what it was, apparently had the same problem with follow-through he'd always had with this particular project. But here's the detail I think is the most profound in this entire story. Edison had already built a phone to the dead. In 1877, it was called the phonograph. The very first recording he made on it was his own voice, reciting "Mary Had a Little Lamb." And when that voice came back out of the horn, floating in the air without a human throat to produce it, people in the room were genuinely frightened. Reporters wrote that people crossed themselves because it was the first time in human history that a voice existed without a body. An echo from nowhere. Dying people began recording their final words and farewells onto phonograph cylinders so their families could hear them one last time. The phonograph funeral. Edison himself suggested this as a use case for his invention. He was, by all accounts, a deeply morbid man. And it was precisely then, in 1877, that the seed was planted. If I can preserve the voice of someone who has died, Edison must have thought, can I go further? Can I hear a voice that was never recorded? One that exists somewhere out there, past the boundary we can't cross. The spirit phone wasn't a strange detour in Edison's career. It was the logical conclusion of it. Edison never finished the machine, but he planted the idea, and it grew. Today, an entire industry exists around the exact premise he described. EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Researchers place audio recorders in empty rooms, then analyze the recordings for voices that weren't audible during the session. Direct descendants of Edison's beam and meter concept. Build something sensitive enough, and the dead will find a way to register. In 2002, a man named Frank Sumption built what became known as Frank's box, a radio that continuously sweeps through frequencies, theoretically allowing spirits to tune in and string together words from the static. People still use versions of it today. Modern ghost hunters carry smartphones loaded with apps that convert them into portable spirit detectors, the pocket-sized version of what Edison was reaching for in that darkened laboratory. And then there's this. In 1997, fully 6 decades after Edison's death, a group called the Skoll Experimental Group claimed to have received, during a seance session, a roll of previously unexposed film. When developed, it showed technical diagrams and the initials TAE. A professor from Cardiff University named Arthur Ellison reportedly built the device from those specifications. During a session on January 21, 1997, the group claims they heard a voice through the static. "Hello? Can you hear me? This is Thomas calling. Can you hear me?" Hello. Whether that was Edison, a recording artifact, wishful hearing, or something else entirely, I'll leave for you to decide. Thomas Alva Edison died on October 18, 1931, at 3:27 in the morning, at his home in West Orange, New Jersey. The clock in his library was stopped at that moment. It still shows 3:27. His last breath was collected in a test tube. It's preserved at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. A glass vial containing the final exhale of a man who spent his last decade trying to figure out where exhales go. He left behind millions of pages of notes. Researchers are still going through them, looking for more evidence of the Spirit Phone project. The official verdict: no patent was ever filed. No verified prototype was ever built. No machine was ever documented in any rigorous scientific record. Maybe it really was a publicity stunt. Maybe it was the fantasy of an old man wrestling with mortality. Maybe he genuinely believed every word and simply ran out of time. But there's the French diary, the excised chapters, the 600 letters, the secret experiment with mediums and a beam of light in a dark room, the pacts, the notebooks his family burned or buried. And there is this, something Edison himself said about every failed experiment, every dead end, every invention that didn't work. I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Maybe the Spirit Phone was just one more way that didn't work. Or maybe, and I'll leave you sitting with this, he simply hadn't found the right filament yet. Somewhere, a needle on a meter is waiting to move. You know what the strangest part of this whole story is? The phonograph. Edison's own invention, the very device that first made it possible to hear dead people speak, preserved his voice. There is a recording from 1870, scratchy, hissing, barely holding together across the decades. But it's him, Thomas Alva Edison, the voice of the man who spent half his life trying to call the dead, who became, himself, a voice from a machine. Mary had a little lamb,